competition is fucking regular 1x servers, which never wipe. So when you're trying to get started on there, you're fighting against tribes that have over a year worth of loot. Here's an example of what one of these servers looks like. And this is just me joining the first random one that I saw. All of this land claim makes it literally impossible to start. Hence, most of these servers not even having fucking 10 people on them. If ArcPoc fails, this is all that's left. So I hope you can see exactly exactly why I don't want ArcPoc to fail. But it wasn't just any regular old ArcPoc wipe. You see, about 9 months ago, Wildcard, in their infinite wisdom, had for some reason decided to add player-made mods to every ArcPoc wipe, which, when you consider most of these mods were made for single-player PvE worlds, made PvP completely unbalanced. And as a result, Arcpocalypse server population had tanked. And here's the important part. Just recently, they had reversed that decision. No more fucking unbalanced-ass mods. And so, as one of the first wipes back without mods, this wipe was going to be incredibly important. If things went well, we might just be able to revive the ArcPoc servers. But a bad wipe could mean the death of ArcPoc itself. And if ArcPoc died again, the only other option would be playing on fucking servers like this. And so that would be my goal. Do everything in my power to revive these servers. But seeing as I was currently literally level 1, I couldn't exactly do too much now, could I? First order of business was to go do a note run and get levels. And this is where I ran into my first problem. See, down here under one of these foundations is the 4x note. Basically, when you collect this, you get a bunch of XP plus an XP boost, which is very important when starting fresh on a server. Knowing this, some assholes will hop on the server, farm up just enough resources to cover the 4x note, meaning nobody can grab it, and then leave the server and never play ever again. This is exactly the kind of shit that kills PvP servers. At the moment, there wasn't particularly much I could do. I had to just continue on and try to grab the other notes that I could. Along the way, I met some random guy who tried to kill me, and so I went and hid behind a rock, and when I turned around, I saw a guy crouched down, drawing a bow back to shoot me. I get that my character is pretty fat and kind of looks like a pig, but that doesn't mean you have to hunt me like one too. At any rate, while the guy chased me down to kill me, I backed off, crafted a torch, and now this hunted little hog would become the hunter. Come here, buddy. Piranha's roughing him up. Having gotten the guy weak, he hopped on his nearby parasaur, tried fighting me with that. But that of course didn't go super good, so eventually the guy just started running away. And although the parasaur was a good bit faster than me, as a human my stamina was better. So, like an actual prehistoric human, I began chasing him down with endurance hunting. He'd run out of stamina. His parasaur could run no further. Imagine the last thing you see before you die is this fat piece of shit character. Character hurtling towards you with a torch in his hand. Now, his kit would be a nice little start for me on the server. Though, that being said, he did make me run a decent distance to get it. I always love when games accidentally make it so that Realistic strategies like endurance hunting are actually viable. Now with all this gear in my possession, my tubby ass went on a little marathon to get to my base spot in the Redwoods. At one point I got stuck in this hole and I could like almost jump out, but not quite. So as funny as my fat body flailing around this hole was, I had to place a sleeping bag, kill myself, and then I could get my loot. And by now I had basically arrived at my base spot. Lord only knows why I decided to take the most circuitous route here possible. But now that I was here, time to farm up the resources and throw down the base. Oh, I like this spot. This was a brand new spot that I'd only recently discovered that I was very excited to use, and it was basically perfect. I could put a 2x1 in here and it'd be pretty much invisible. Now of course putting this like hidden base spot in a video kind of ruins it, and I wish I could use this spot more, but it is what it is. What can I fucking do? Next up, I used the trank arrows I got from the guy to go and tame a nearby Thyla. Okay, maybe I did get killed by level 15 Sabertooth, which is kind of embarrassing, but upon respawning nearby, I of course, killed the thing first, and then I found the Thyla knocked out nearby. Pretty ass level, but it'll work. Now the cool thing about Thylos, even low-level shitty ones like these, is that every time you do a consecutive jump, it picks up a little bit of speed. So by bee-hopping, you can actually become one of the faster tames in the game. I used this to quickly find another high-level Thylo, which I then knocked out. And while that was taming, I jumped across the Redwoods and gathered some resources, so that when the decent level Thylo was done taming, I already had enough resources to fully equip myself, including a set of flak armor that I skinned to give me the appearance of a battered old warrior goblin. And so, while having the appearance of one of the most evil and despicable creatures of all time, I could now set out for my goal of helping to revive Archpok. The first thing on the docket was to go get rid of that fucking covering over the 4x node. I crafted just enough grenades and then bee-hopped my way all the way down there. Although the foundation hasn't been destroyed, that doesn't actually matter because you can grab the note through the foundation. The only important part was destroying the walls so you could actually leave after grabbing the note. With these destroyed, new players on the server would no longer have this massive disadvantage over them. I left the remaining stone structures around the note because they wouldn't prevent you from grabbing it, but they would prevent other people from building over it again. And so I hopped on my merry way. My next objective was to jump all over the map, just kind of getting a feel for the server and the people on it, seeing what I could do to help. Poor guy's life was probably flashing before his eyes when he saw an evil-looking goblin guy mounted on a giant cat jump into his base like that. But all I was here to do was pay him a compliment to his house and throw him some hide. I left the guy and then just began jumping across every beach, passing out hide to every new player I saw, and occasionally scaring a couple of them. Upon seeing a giant cat jumping towards him at like Mach 2, breaking the sound barrier along the way, this Parasaur guy made a run for it, and so I just kind of followed him. Out of stamina and seeing that he couldn't escape, he just started kind of doing a little twirl on his Parasaur, which was kind of funny. Of course, I gave that guy some hide, and when he started doing little jumps, I jumped with him. After that, I just kind of went on my merry way. And after a decent bit of going along the beach, I headed back inlands toward my base to grab some more resources when I saw somebody. A guy in an RG had just attempted to rip me off my Thylo. This was a pretty bad matchup for me. RGs are a very strong counter for Thylos, but if I'm able to dodge around and bait failed picks from him, he'll run out of stamina, and that's when I can strike. He was starting to lose stam, but this was a dangerous game I was playing. He picked me. Luckily, I had a few grapples and I could escape. I got him back on my Thylo, but if that happened again, I'd be dead. I continued circling around him. At this point in the fight, a random Pterodon guy tried to jump in and help me. As brave as this guy might have been, he was completely outmatched. Before I could do anything, he was killed, and so was his bird. But his death wouldn't be in vain. I could tell the RG was now low on stamina. I kept on him. The RG was getting desperate. All I had to do was stop him from getting stamina. Now completely out of stamina, he hopped off his RG and made a run for it. Fucking guy died of fall damage. And on his body, I found the saddle of the guy who had tried to help me. But in the RG guy's retreat, I had noticed something very interesting. The direction he had chosen to fly towards had a couple of his taming traps nearby. Now this doesn't really make any sense. If you're trying to run for your life, you wouldn't run to taming traps that would do nothing for you. So I started looking around, and eventually I found his hidden base in the woods nearby. At this point, I felt like that scene in Breaking Bad where Walter White is like telling the meth head to not buy all of his supplies in one place. Except instead of tips on how to better cook meth, it's tips on how to have a better hidden base. Like for example, don't put your super obvious and giant tame traps right next to your base. And especially when someone's chasing you, don't fly towards that hidden base. But this was very concerning because this hidden base was insanely close to mine. In fact, from within my base, we were so close that I could literally hear them spawning in. Wildcard, come on, bro. Why did you need to make that the female spawning in sound effect? And having a guy like this as my neighbor, especially after I just killed him, and since my base's only defense is its stealth, is a really big problem. So I went to gather some materials for C4. With the C4 craft, I went literally 500 feet to the west and got rid of my neighbors. There was hardly any loot in here, but it was never about that. It was mainly about not having rowdy neighbors that would raid me the second they found me. Especially considering the fact that I found 4 grenades in his smithy, which would have been just enough to break into my base. It was like Iraq's WMDs, except actually real this time. With that done, I got back to patrolling around the map, and on a lark I just decided to visit the 4X note. There's no possible way! I found that some random guy had come by and covered it back up, this time with metal. They had found the 4X note uncovered, meaning fresh people could start on the server, gotten so offended by that they spent resources and time to clear out the stone structures already there, and then placed a metal over it. You know what the worst part about it is? I looked at these guys' tribe name, and they don't even play on the server. These Chinese dudes literally transferred in from one of the connected island servers, and went out of their way to try to kill this one for literally no gain. This is some like level 100 misanthrope type shit, dude. Now luckily, since I'd crafted that C4, I was able to clear this up rather easily. And as soon as that was done, these two people were able to grab the 4X note and actually get started on the server. I still don't understand what the point of covering up the note on a server you don't even play on is, but here we are. With this done, hopefully for the last time, I got back to roaming around. Not too far from here to the north, I found a Titan that was acting a little bit weird. I looked around and I found that some guy was trying to kill it for XP, but he was just using an RG and a crossbow. As you could imagine, this guy is going to be here till the end of days. I doubt any crossbow made by man would have enough durability to kill a Titan, so I decided to offer the guy a hand. See, the main attack of a Thylo does bleed, which in this game does a percentage of the enemy's health, so over the matter of a couple of minutes, I could very easily whittle this Titan's HP down till there was barely anything left, and then he could crossbow it and get the XP he needed. So I went and offered this to him, and the guy tried to rip me off my fucking Thylo.
Oh, you little cocksucker.
So once again, I just began dodging around to drain his stamina. Killing this guy was kind of proving to be a pain in the ass. He would land while he still had a good amount of stamina, and so every time he landed, I was only able to get maybe 1 or 2 hits on him. And so this guy took me on a fucking wild goose chase all over, doing just a little bit of damage to him every time he landed. But I was slowly wearing him down. Almost completely drained of stamina and low HP on his bird, he just decided to fly straight up as far as he could to try to get out of my render. But no luck. Now out of stamina in the air, he had no choice but to start parachuting to the ground. I sat on the earth, the Thylo licking his fucking lips as this rotisserie chicken slowly descended down towards us. Mind you, very, very slowly. Once he was nearing the ground, he used a pyromane that he had had on his shoulder the entire time. Basically, it expands to a full-grown creature, and he was now making a run for it. I gave chase. I bowled the pyro, and soon killed the player. By the time all of this was said and done, we had been running fucking laps around the southwest of the map. And all of that because the guy wanted to attack me when I offered him help. After this, I kind of just hopped around the map a little bit more, and after helping out a few more people, I called it a night. Day 2 began with some bad news. A plague had descended upon the lands. See, on freshly wiped servers, about a day or 2 after wipe, the swamp fever plague will begin. It takes a bit for the first human to be infected, as they have to find an infected leech. But once swamp fever has made its first jump into a human, the plague then spreads like a wildfire. All you have to do is stand next to somebody who's infected, and you too will have the plague. The only cure are rather difficult to craft lesser antidotes. You'll stay infected even through death. Once you're infected with the plague, your HP, stamina, and weight are all reduced by 20%, which can be debilitating, especially when you're just starting off. So far, the plague was in its early... stages, with most confirmed infections down in the south of the map where there's far more players. In these areas, we were probably already looking at 75% of players being infected. Areas with lower player densities, such as the west and most of the inland sections of the map, still had not yet suffered the worst of the plague. In these areas, around half of all players were infected. And a few areas that combined low player density and challenging terrain that kept out newer players had infection rates probably somewhere around 20%. And so now my goal would be to slow down this infection as much as possible. I couldn't stop it, and I certainly couldn't cure everyone, but if I could slow it down just a little bit, people would have more time to move out of the early game, and thus the plague would have less less effect when it finally hit them. However, the thing about making antidotes is it's not exactly easy. You need narcotic, rare flowers, rare mushrooms, and leech blood. However, there's one creature that's perfect for this, the Thezi. So I went out, found one, and tamed him up. When I brought him back to base, he harvested a lot of the bushes kind of covering up my base automatically. The way he looked over at me, the exact same way a cat would before it like knocks some shit off a table or something, was pretty funny, but the fact that my hidden base wasn't nearly as hidden anymore wasn't that funny. Which is kind of an asshole move because like you live here too, bro, and you just got here. But at any rate, with the Thezi now here, I could go ahead and deforest the local swamp and get as many rare mushrooms as I needed. Having felled a significant chunk of the swamp, I now had 275 rare mushrooms. That'll be plenty. Next up, I left the swamp, went up the nearby mountain, and got a shit ton of rare flowers. Not exactly that fucking rare if I got all these from a couple bushes, huh? And since I already had narcotics, all that was left was some leech blood. Having gotten the blood of what are probably the most disgusting creatures of all time, I can now make a whole shit ton of antidotes. And after waiting a good while for these to craft, I now had a good stock of cures. I made my way straight down to the heart of this infection down in the southern areas. Not only would I go out here to cure the living, but I'd also need to destroy any infected dead bodies, as those too could continue to spread the plague. Now at basically ground zero for this plague, I became Plague Dr. Burt. Dr. Burt's first patient, and he's literally jumping for joy. Despite looking like the most sinister goblin freak, I might be doing some good after all, and so I kept finding people to cure.
They're scared of the goblin. Let's go, he's cured! Thank you so much. Take it easy, huh? Let me hit him with one good backflip.
Having just run out of antidotes, I made a quick pit stop at base, farmed up a whole bunch more, and then got back to it. This little guy got spooked by me jumping at him so fast, and he just started making a run for it. I followed him and tried to talk to him in local chat, but no response. But he was still carrying the plague around, and so he was gonna get cured one way or another. The guy was like a stray cat or something that I was chasing down to feed, and as tempting as it would have been to take his shotgun and 30 shells, I had to pass. I cured the guy and left him an extra antidote, and then went back on my way. Down in the very southern parts of the West 2 Island, I found a guy who had recently tamed Pterodon. I got to talking to the guy when, like a rabid fucking pitbull, some guy jumped out of the bushes nearby and murdered him before I could stop him. And before my eyes, he went on to murder the guy's Pterodon. I shot the guy in the back of the head with an arrow, but the hit reg in this game is ass, so it just straight up didn't register. Neither did the other shot I landed on him. But eventually I did kill the rabid fucking beach bob, and I offered to help the guy who had been attacked. His name was Schlur or some shit like that, and I offered to give him all the loot back and help him tame a new Pterodon. But I ended up receiving no response. Now luckily after this, I did find the Schlur guy up north where he had tamed a new Pterodon, but he didn't have any saddle. And so I helped the guy out by making him one, which would have been kind of a pain in the ass for him to make. And so despite him being brutally murdered down in the south, his story finally had a happy ending. I left Schlur on the beach and continued curing the server.
Are you for real right now, bro? Alright.
This random dude came charging at me with his Carno, but he very clearly stood no chance. I mean, the guy was using the wrong attack on the Carno. He was left clicking instead of right clicking, which means he wasn't doing any bleed damage to me. This guy was quite obviously very new, and it wouldn't feel right to just kill him. So I got his Carno to low HP, then I sniped him off the back of his Carno.
Got him.
And while he was sleeping, I cured him of his plague and let the guy wake up. This was almost like when a kid attacks you. The guy never stood a chance, and it would have been almost unsportsmanlike to kill him. So I just kept hopping around.
Are you for real?
He done a little bit of damage, but I was fine. So, like the RGs, I started following him, waiting for him to land for stamina. He had landed. I moved in.
Chad? Are you for real right now, bruh? What in the heavens are you doing?
I'd recognized him. This was Chad, one of the Goopers. He was even wearing the Varangian guard fit. Seeing as this was a Gooper, we obviously stopped fighting. And then we just kind of spoke for a little bit when I had an idea. See, he was just kind of bumming around the same way that I was, and so he could help me on my 15th century plague doctor quest. I gave him 7 antidotes and set him off on his way to cure everybody that he came across. And so for a bit, the server had 2 people curing everybody they could find. Not too long after that, I'd received word that all the antidotes had been successfully used. Running into someone you recognize just randomly on a server is always pretty fucking cool. And after I had used the rest of my antidotes, more than 50 in total, I had done everything I could. A few hours after this, I recognized a couple of the people I'd cured before, and I could see that they still were uninfected.
Oh, that's the guy from earlier. He still hasn't gotten it. Nice, dude. Okay, it's actually kind of working.
My scheme had actually worked. Of course, we hadn't completely cured the server, but we'd put a big enough dent in the disease that by the time everybody was once again infected, they would have further progressed into the game, and so Swamp Fever would have a minimal impact on them. Having cleansed the body, it was now time to cleanse the soul. And how do I do that? Well, through art. But seeing as I had 0 artistic ability whatsoever, I had to get a little creative. See, there's this bug with the template hammer that allows you to make some kind of wacky structures. See, you make a template of something like a foundation or a pillar, and then you press export on that, and this will copy some sort of XML type file into your clipboard, which you can then paste in a text editor. At this point, you can go through and just kind of change whatever settings you want. Shout out to my boy Wise Wizard, by the way, for showing me this. And using this, I created the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Best part about this build is that the ladder straight up doesn't work. Because when you climb a ladder, you just go straight up, so you don't even go through the fucking hatch frame. I put this right at the heart of South 1, so plenty of people could come by and admire my pretty uninspired build. And of course, the most important part of any art piece was the completely bullshit-filled description. So I placed one billboard as sort of an artist's signature, and then another where I wrote a bunch of existential shit that totally doesn't apply to the art piece like a true artist. After this, I farmed a little bit more, and placed down my second art piece not too far away. This one was literally just a sideways 2x1. Again, I put down a billboard and it described how life can turn sideways really fast or something like that, but it was just a sideways 2x1. As my final art piece to the server, I took inspiration from that one painting with all the upside down stairs and shit, and had my own little take on it. This one was probably my best one yet, mainly because it was almost like a playground because you could jump around on the thing. Although like all the others, it was super derivative, because again, I have actually 0 artistic ability. For this one, I honestly cannot for the life of me even remember what the fuck I put as like this fake deep explanation behind it. It was probably some stupid shit anyway. Having completed these 3 art pieces all scattered across the south of the map, I was pretty content. Nothing quite like a couple public art exhibitions to bring the mood of everybody up. And with that, I retired for the day. For the next couple days, I was unable to hop online because I had received a spurious copyright takedown request. You see, upset about how his team had been exposed to have cheaters in it in the Uncovering a Mysterious Cheating Tribe video, the leader of MT6 had filed a copyright takedown request because in my 54-minute long video, I had used about 20 seconds of his footage to convey how they play. So now my options were as follows. 1, I can just take this on the chin, the video stays down and any revenue I made from it is just lost. Or 2, I can reveal my full name and address to this guy so he can serve me legal papers, which he wasn't even going to do anyway because the guy doesn't have a fucking case. And so with these two being the most public options, you can see exactly why he decided to do this. No matter what I do, I fucking lose. But there was a third option that he didn't exactly account for. I contacted a law firm to act as representatives for me so I wouldn't have to reveal my name to him. Once I told him I was getting lawyers involved, he mysteriously dropped a takedown request, almost like it had been bullshit the whole time. Let me remind you, all of this happened because he got upset about a fucking ARK video. These fucking Mego Tribe guys are crazy. But with that little kerfluffle dealt with, I could now hop back on. Since it had been a few days, I decided to hop around the map and see what was new. Before long, I found a new player getting terrorized by some guy out of Baryonyx. So I decided to help him out. He had stunned me for 10 seconds, but that wouldn't be nearly long enough. The Baryonyx had bled out.
You're fucked.
Having saved this guy and his tames, I got back to roaming around the map. Later, a Chinese hacker from a Griffin killed me,
Bro.
and I could tell he was hacking because all of his shots were hitting only my boots, which when you think about what's the hardest piece of armor to hit on a jumping Thyla guy, it might literally just be the boots, and then also he just straight up didn't take any of my loot. So this Chinese foot fetish guy was just a minor nuisance at most. And so I just kept going on my merry way. This pterodon belonged to a guy called Albertus. And now this guy could be a fan, so I didn't necessarily want to get recognized, and so I switched out the goblin skin for something else. Don't ask why I have this installed. And then I started looking for him in the woods nearby. I couldn't find the guy, but I did hear him crawling in a bush nearby. The guy had my exact character model, except I think it was not fat, which was kind of insulting. But this was certainly an interesting situation. I got to talking to the guy, and I'm not even gonna lie, I was trying to get him to say he was Trafalgar because that would have been pretty fucking funny, but no dice. Anyway, seeing this guy was just a chill ass dude, I revealed my true form to him as a goblin, but I don't think he recognized me. Anyway, I decided to give this guy a pistol that I had recently gotten out of a drop. He bullied me and then drove his raft away, completely leaving his pterodon on the beach, but I swam out to him to let him know that I was just trying to give him something, and so I invited him back to shore, where I decided to give the pistol to him.
Are you trolling me?
The guy had bullied me again and was trying to make a torch play on me. Having a doppelganger of myself make a torch play on me was very fucking funny.
Finally back to his bird. Bet you he flies away.
With his pterodon bullied and escape now impossible, he didn't really stand much of a chance. I killed the guy, but the whole situation had been so amusing to me, I still left him that pistol. With this little saga done, I got back to roaming around. An RG belonging to a tribe called Los Pepes was flying straight towards me. The guy clearly wanted a fight, and so, like always with an RG, I started dodging around. At this particular moment, my Thyla decides to take a shit.
Are you kidding me, bro?
Pretty bad timing, buddy. I quickly get back on my Thylo, but suddenly this RG guy isn't interested in fighting at all. As soon as he found out I had grapples on me and this wouldn't just be an easy kill for him, he wasn't interested anymore. I followed him for a while, but there was nothing I could do. Trying to get a better handle on these guys, I started looking around the mountain he had jumped me on, and before long I found their base. At this point in the wipe, these guys were probably the most developed tribe on the server, with a pretty solid base and a shit ton of turrets. Not only that, but I also noticed that these guys had a Giga, and seeing how these guys had treated me back on the beach, I decided maybe I should cut them down to size a little bit. You see, they'd kind of made an amateur hour mistake. Their prized Giga had been left just barely outside of turret range. Now they probably knew this and they thought, who fucking cares, it's a Giga, what's gonna kill it, right? Well, you remember when I told you Thylas do percentage-based bleed damage, right? Hopefully that's enough for you to piece together what happened next. I sat there for a while just munching on their Giga. When I saw one of them fly back towards base, I'm gonna be honest, at this point I thought the jig was up, right? Like he was gonna see what I was doing and that was gonna be that, but apparently this guy somehow managed to miss his biggest tame bleeding profusely. And so when he landed and went into base, I started biting the thing again, and he even flew away from base and still didn't notice that it was getting killed. I don't know what more could have been done for him to see. The Giga had like these giant blood spurts popping out, and somehow he didn't see that. With the Giga dead, I took the saddle, which was a pretty nice one, and with that, I was kind of just done here. I continued just roaming around, seeing what I could do to help, interacting with all those I came across. A few hours later, a bit further from their base, I came across these guys again, and once again their RG swooped down to attack me, so it was time for another fight. After one failed pick, this guy was already trying to land. He must have went into this fight with literally no stamina. Looks like luckily this time we were going to skip the whole chasing the guy across the map thing. With him dead, I killed his RG and then I talked a little bit of shit in chat, and their response left me speechless. Bro, what? You can literally see me go into chat to type something, come up with nothing, and then change my mind and just cancel it. That was just so like crazy and out of pocket, bro. And this wasn't even the guy I killed that was saying this shit. But even worse than that, Scholler was one of these guys that I had helped start off. He's the dude that got killed at West 2, and then I found him again and gave him that Pterodon saddle. Now part of me was proud because now his tribe was probably the biggest tribe on the server, but the rest of me was pretty horrified that he would just say some shit like that over me killing his buddy. But you know what? It was very, very generous and selfless of this guy to volunteer all the loot inside his base to everybody else on the server like that. And so there were some preparations to be made for this raid. I first had to transfer to the center so I could find a whole bunch of decent level trikes and stegos to tame. Once these were all tamed up and cryoed, I transferred back to the island, where I met up with Brother Box and Donkey to help me out on this raid. We gathered up all the supplies we would need, and we made our way over there. Once in the area, we set down a little raid base, just a turret and a cryo fridge, and then we uncryoed all of our soaking tames, as well as placing down a Zeppelin. See, having gotten a good look at their base, I could see that the southeastern side of the base, pushed up right against the cliff, had far fewer turrets protecting it than the rest of the base. However, seeing as this was up against a cliff, they probably thought nobody could attack them from this direction anyway. And that right there is where the Zeppelin comes in. Basically, the plan was as follows. We would load up a couple soakers onto the Zeppelin, fly up to the south of the base, and then literally let our tames get shot up until they were almost dead. Where we would then fly back to our raid base, swap out the injured dinos for fresh dinos, and while we were gone, Brother Box would use a snow owl to heal up all the hurt dinos. We would then take the fresh dinos, have them soak up as many bullets as they could, and we would just rinse and repeat this process until the turrets had no more bullets to shoot with. Now keep in mind, this isn't some like crackpot theory we've constructed on how to raid bases, or we're just being weird. This is just standard operating procedure for how you raid any base that has turrets. You just kind of let your tame sit there and get shot up almost to the point of death. I think you soaked that one, dog.
Back out. I think a few of them got soaked there because I felt less bullets, less damage coming in.
Our poor trike at this point would be more lead than it would be fucking meat. But hey, you're doing a good job, buddy. Keep it up.
Do you think these strikes go like brain dead after they've gotten 400 bullets into their skull?
Empty?
They really had to defend this side very well.
Slowly but surely, we're advancing closer and closer to the base as each further turret ran out of ammo.
Oh,
Eventually, there was only a few turrets standing in our way.
okay, that's annoying.
He's already partially soaked, isn't he?
Yeah. Oh, that's him.
With most of the turrets now out of ammo, we could walk up to the wall of their base.
Whenever you're ready, Donkey.
We blew in and went to go take a look at the loot.
I know.
Ooh, hardcore jump. Hold on, let me
Is that right?
just leave it. Just leave it.
And I'll come up with
You're
the
filled.
Yo, these kids are low. Oh!
There was a lot of shit here. I could do some real good for the server with all this loot. So we made multiple trips with the RG just to get this loot back down to the raid base. And then made a shit ton of trips down from the raid base to the actual base. Once all the metal was in one place, which by the way was over 5,000 ingots in total, I began crafting metal structures. Not to upgrade mine, because frankly the stone was quite cozy, but to give out to the people of the server. I take from the rich and I give to the poor. I am Goblin Hood. You see, I had crafted in the perfect ratio to create 30 2x1s. You see, I love 2x1s so much that I'm just gonna hand them out like fucking candy. Jokes aside, they are actually the perfect size for a base. You fit everything you need in there, and you're not drawing too much unwanted attention. And also because they're made out of metal, they are decently hard to break into. And so I took as many of these 2x1s as I could onto my Thylo, which was only 5 at a time, and seeing as I had 30 bases to give out to people, I didn't waste any time, and I got straight to it.
It's actually a pretty cozy base spot.
I'd given out a decent few of the bases by now, but things weren't going to be all smooth sailing. A random wyvern guy had just tried to kill me. Of course, when there's a fire wyvern after you, I did the only logical thing, I went in the water, and so we ended up spending a little bit of time just eyeing each other up, when he made a really dumb mistake. Apparently it was fucking amateur hour, because the guy had gone to land and had accidentally fallen into water. That meant the rider was now dismounted and vulnerable. It was time for me to... go in. Having killed the player, I got to just chomping up the wyvern. And the whole time this guy's Miguana buddy was just sitting there fruitlessly trying to left click me, doing like no damage. Eventually the guy wised up and whistled the wyvern to fly away, but the wyvern was so close to death that I was able to call in help from a couple of my buddies nearby, who were able to walk up and just bite it to death with a pterodon. With his buddy's wyvern dead, the Megaluana guy just started flying all over the place. He was fast so we couldn't catch him, but the good thing was apparently he thought he could clutch up the situation and he started landing on random rocks to shoot at us, which eventually meant that one of us snuck up on him. These guys had had some pretty good fucking gear and tames on them, and seemingly they were just going along the beach killing everybody they saw. Good riddance. With this done, I got back to handing out bases. Eventually, having given out most of the structures, but not all, I had simply run out of people that I could find. So for the rest, I just found storage boxes on the beach that really only a new player would check, and I left some metal 2x1s in those. I wish I could see people's reactions when they open up a fucking cooking pot on the beach and they find a metal 2x1. I also left some hidden in my little art structures just to reward anyone curious enough to check that out too. There was now going to be 30 bases all across the map that I had simply given out to people. That's pretty damn cool. And with the structures gone, I was now done. I had hopped all over the server helping everybody that I could, made a serious dent in the spread of swamp fever across the server, cleared the 4X note twice, raided the biggest tribe on the entire server, and gave out all the loot I got from them, all while, may I remind you, wearing a costume that makes me look like an evil fucking goblin. I had done all I could for the server. And so, I logged off. Now, after the wipe bit concluded, I took a look at the player numbers on Battlemetrics, and I'm happy to say, ArcPox's making a comeback. Who could have guessed that taking out the mods that literally nobody had asked for would make the servers more popular? And for whatever little part I played in that, I was proud. Thank you for watching, with a special thank you to all of I played that literally nobody had asked for would make the servers more popular. And for whatever little part I played in that, I was proud. Thank you for watching. With a special thank you to all of my YouTube members. You guys help keep this whole thing afloat, so for that, I am eternally grateful.
This is the story of a man who escaped certain death, took nearly total control of a foreign economy, became the richest man the world had ever seen to that point, and created one of history's largest financial bubbles, only to have it all crash down, dying a gambler who never accepted his failure. This is how John Law engineered and gambled away the French economy. John was born in 1671 to a fairly well-off family in Edinburgh. His father was a goldsmith, and a good one too, gaining enough goodwill to become the title holder to Lauriston Castle. In the late 1600s, goldsmiths were the banks of Great Britain. A widespread coin shortage across the continent forced Europeans to conserve the shrinking gold they had. Goldsmiths, being well-trusted handlers of it, would issue out promises to pay, basically IOUs of gold, which were used to settle debt in their communities. If you wanted to send someone money, you could just write a letter to the goldsmith and he would transfer it for you. This environment is where John Law grew up and worked for his father. Young John was naturally gifted at math and with numbers, but his real passion was at the casino. John loved gambling and all things debauchery. He loved drinking, he was a favorite with women, and he was a regular at gaming houses throughout his life. His friends called him Beau, which I'm told by my associate is like the early modern equivalent of a situationship king. When his father died, he left Scotland, going to the London high life, trying to get rich through dumb, quick schemes, mostly gambling. Obviously, this didn't work. He actually ended up gambling away his inheritance money and mortgaged his family's estate to pay for it. Besides that, John was involved in the usual drama that a Beau like him would face. He was fighting with Beau Wilson over something, most likely a girl, and the two would regularly engage each other. Eventually, it ended in a duel between them, and when John was 23, he was arrested for the murder of Edward Wilson. John Law was sentenced to be hanged. He did murder somebody in broad daylight after all, but I don't know. I thought the point of a duel was to kill somebody legally. His high-ranking friends begged for a royal pardon, though, and his charge was reduced. But then, while he was waiting in prison, in a story nobody knows the full details of, John Law escaped and found his way on a ship to Europe. His life for the next 21 years consisted of popping out in a new European city, gambling, trading, and courting noble friends. Cayenne, Amsterdam, Venice, Genoa, Turin, Budapest, back to Edinburgh at one point, Paris, he went all over. In each city, he would study their banking systems, practically dedicating his life to thinking and writing about money. He was a goldsmith's son, after all. He thought about the best ways to store money, to exchange currencies for others, the role interest plays in society, and most importantly, how to improve the real economy using fake money. And in his famous Essay on a Land Bank, he laid out his ideas. Instead of backing money by gold or silver, he thought it should be backed by a state's land, so that it was more stable, more predictable, and could be issued out in higher quantities. The Dutch didn't get rich because of their hard-working nature, as many Europeans thought at the time, but because of their abundant money supply and cheap credit, letting them finance the world's largest corporation. His next famous work was Money and Trade Considered, an actual proposal to the Scottish Parliament to set up a land bank. Scotland faced so many hardships, he wrote. The soil is hard to farm, the winters are harsh, and the people of the island know no manufacturers. If land-backed securities were used to back a currency, farming and factories would take off, and once financed, a land bank would profit from the employment of previously wasted resources. Although this was debated in the Scottish Parliament, it was ultimately rejected. So he went back to Europe, amassing a small fortune through setting up his own gaming houses, about £20,000. Rumors would spread of a rich banker who set up shop in the city, in some cases finding him influential friends like the Dukes of France, in some others getting him kicked out of the city. He never stopped proposing his land bank though, even if it wasn't for his home country. He tried to present it to the King of France, Louis XIV, but that guy must have said something like, "A bank of land? What about my gold? I'm the Sun King. I own it, and you're a Protestant, so you can leave now." He also presented it to the Duke of Savoy, who liked the idea but thought it was too risky for such a small kingdom to try. The Duke did recommend John try again in France though, because the French are always open to new ideas. Luckily for John Law, Louis XIV, no matter how powerful he was not powerful enough to stop gangrene, and he was now dead in 1715. His son, the new King of France, was 5 years old, so power fell upon a regency council, headed by Philippe II, the Duke of Orleans. Everybody's favorite part of running a government is how you don't have to worry about a budget. It'll just balance itself, you know? But in times of political instability, like this one, sometimes you really do need to crunch the numbers and get the budget in order. And oh man, did Louis XIV really screw up France's balance sheet. During his 72-year-long reign, royal authority had replaced a balance of power between estates and provinces. He appointed his own loyalists into local city councils, curtailed royal courts, instituted Protestant discrimination, and fought a series of wars to bring glory to France. They expanded France's territories, yes, but also its debt. Meanwhile, he appointed Jean-Baptiste Colbert as his finance minister, best known as the father of mercantilism, an idea that the amount of gold a nation has is the source of its strength. So writing this debt, as long as it didn't touch the gold supply, was no big deal, right? Besides that, Louis had considerably expanded civil service and the army, set up North American colonies, and built a grand palace for himself at Versailles. So by the start of the Regency, France was in 3 billion livres of debt, about the size of its yearly economic output. Farms laid idle, factories shut down, bankruptcies were rife, and prices were falling. The crown's yearly revenue was 145 million livres, while their expenses were 142 million, meaning at this pace, it would take 1,000 years to pay the debt off. Something big had to be done. What about that law guy who came to Paris like 5 years ago? Isn't he a financial wizard or something? Can't he do anything about it? John Law had been the Duke of Orleans' drinking buddy for a couple of years now, and throughout the time, he was always chatting about his financial ideas. The Duke was already kind of convinced of the land bank idea, although he didn't fully understand it. But now that he basically ruled France, John got a powerful ally. He proposed it to the council, saying it would bring employment and revenue, boost agriculture, trade, and even the population size. A big, beautiful bank, that's what would fix this mess. Some on the council hated it though. The Duke of Saint-Simon called for France to default on its debt, while the Duke of Noailles was against both bankruptcy and the land bank. But eventually, besides some other reforms, like punishing private tax collectors who went far over their profit limit, it was decided to let John Law set up his bank. But instead of a state bank like he wanted, it was a private bank, and it wouldn't manage royal revenues, until he could at least prove his monetary genius. In May 1716, La Banque Générale, the general bank, opened its doors in Paris, gaining the trust of some when the Duke himself rode up and deposited 1 million livres of gold into it. Right now, the bank is kinda just a bank. It was well run, profitable, and conservative with its finances. It kept supplies of gold and silver, but lent out notes, just slips of paper. Slips like these ones. This was going to be France's currency now. To give it some authority, the crown allowed taxes to be paid in this paper. Not bad, but besides being easier to carry, people didn't see the use of paper money. So one thing John did to entice people to take out this paper and expand the money supply like he wanted was to make them slightly more valuable than coins. All notes were exchangeable for coins, and it was exchangeable at the current time. The French crown would often devalue coins in an effort to make up some lost revenue. So if someone was holding a note and coins were suddenly devalued, the note would actually become more valuable as it could be exchanged for the same amount as before. This grew trust in Law's bank, and over a year, notes held a 15% premium over coins. And you know what? Law's plan was kinda working. Commerce was increasing, taxes were now regularly being paid, and France looked like it was on the up. Law had also allowed billet d'état, a little note signifying that you owned a part of the government's debt, to be exchanged for his notes, and this had commanded an almost 23% premium, meaning you were sure to make money if you gave your portion of the debt to the bank. This grew the bank more than anything, and soon enough, branches sprung up all over the country. The bank's conservative nature and the confidence the people gave it kept its balance sheet growing, and because it now owned much of the debt, it was actually starting to be paid off. Now that there are actual results, John Law was accepted by the nobility. Meanwhile, a legacy of one of Louis XIV's glory farming missions was boiling up. Louis had wanted to plant the French flag overseas, just like the Spanish had, and along with Quebec, he set up a new colony in America named Louisiana in 1682. There's no way to easily put this, but Louisiana was a complete poo-hole. It was a hot, humid swamp full of disease and mosquitoes, hurricanes, and alligators. Alligators which no Frenchman should ever have to deal with. But it was for the glory of the French people and whatever, so some settlers did end up there, although half either died or left within their first year of landing on the Gulf Coast. For 13 very unprofitable years, the crown ran it until the treasury was unable to finance the Department of the Marine, which oversaw the colony. In 1712, it was given to a wealthy Parisian merchant named Antoine Crozat, who got sole control over all trading and commercial enterprises there for 15 years, including all of its farms, slaves, and mines. In exchange, he was made to send at least 2 supply ships every year to the settlers. The Western Company he made is estimated to have lost Crozat around 1 million livres, and 10 years before his charter expired, he petitioned the Duke to release him from it. I guess this is really where John Law's finance bro side comes out, because he thinks he can flip this company around and start to make a profit. Yes, John Law becomes the new proprietor of Louisiana, gaining a commercial monopoly over the couple hundred settlers who actually stayed there. Most French people didn't know much about America, but they assumed that's where their gold and silver came from, since the Spanish found American silver and they were rich. Mississippi was like a city of gold, or a land of gold, or a mine of gold, or something. It didn't really matter, the people just assumed it had some gold. During his time running the company, Law played this up, showing off gold ingots supposedly from Louisiana, giving away maps of America, a beautiful continent full of specie, and even organizing parades of miners who were being sent off to America. Most didn't go. It's even during John Law's rule of Louisiana when the official capital was set up, named after his friend, the Duke of Orleans. To finance his purchase of the company, he issued 200,000 shares, each worth 500 livres, that may be payable in those billets d'état at their nominal value. At the time Law got this company, August 1717, these billets were worth about 160 livres. 160 livres to buy something worth 500 livres, and a slice in the New World. It didn't take a genius to figure out that if you held government debt, you could make some easy money from this. Though, if they wanted to replace their lost interest revenue, they would hope for the stock to appreciate. Soon enough, the Mississippi Company was fully capitalized and took on more of the government's debt. In September 1718, Law also bought the monopoly rights to the African tobacco trade. Then, the next year, he bought the Company of China and the East Indies, eventually buying the companies of Senegal, Saint-Domingue, Africa, and the Cap Negre to form the behemoth Company of the East, although most people still called it the Mississippi Company. At the start of 1717, the Royal Council nationalized the General Bank, becoming the Banque Royale, with Law staying in charge. John Law owned the French Central Bank and the rights to all overseas trade, and people really started to take notice of him now. Mississippi Company shares started to be exchanged by aristocrats, noblemen, the middle class, and even servants. These private exchanges wouldn't be regulated by John Law, with their price being determined by their own perceived value. Paris didn't even have a stock market, so most trading was done on the street outside the company's office, Rue Quincampoix. And as we'll see, when the price started to take off, Quincampoix became the central hub of chaos and speculation. The Duke of Saint-Simon says there were crowds all day long with wild excitement, and people trusted the scheme entirely. Noblemen would turn their estates and houses into paper to speculate on the company's prospects. Servants sent by their masters would throw their life savings into the company. Foreigners flocked to Paris to buy stock for themselves. Some would even break through Law's windows and fall down his chimneys to apply for new shares. Robberies and murders were common at night, so guards had to patrol the street. Some houses along the road saw a 20 times increase in their yearly rent during the craze's years. It got so hectic that gates had to be installed on both sides of the street so that there could be some order during the trading hours. One for the nobility, the other for commoners. John Law wasn't done though. The Royal Bank still had to back up its deposits with gold and silver, and besides, it seems like he was transforming the bank into one backed up by a private company's shares rather than the state's land. If he wanted to see his dreams through, he would have to take over the rest of the financial system. The crown had reserved the rights to mint new coins, and since that could mess with the value of newly issued notes, John decided to buy the mint. The crown insisted he pay 50 million livres for these rights, but when you are the economy, you could find a way to make it work. To finance his purchase, he issued 50,000 more shares at 1,000 livres each. About 300,000 people applied for these new shares, and the hype for more spots in the lucrative Mississippi Company shot the price of these shares well above 1,000, all the way to 1,800 livres. To make up for this new demand in notes, 250 million livres were issued. So now, Law owned France's entire money supply and trading profits. But if he wanted to reduce the national debt, he'd need to control the revenue. So John decided to buy the tax farmers. This was a 52 million livres per year payment, and again, he gave out 50,000 shares, this time bumping the price up to 3,000 livres. But the purchase would pay itself off, John thought, because he would reorganize the tax collecting system to cut down on individual tax farmer profit. Though the real mission the Regency trusted him with was to make the debt, poof, disappear. By this point, it had already gone from 3 to 1.5 billion livres. And just looking outside his office, there were clearly people ready to buy into whatever John Law gave out. So the Royal Bank made its most consequential decision yet. It was going to buy the rest of the government's debt. Through 3 separate stock sales, it would gobble this debt up. 3 times the available money would have been given if all applications were accepted. To buy it, in September, the bank printed 240 million livres, then December, 360 million, and finally in February, another 200 million. Whether or not John Law approved of this printing is up for debate, but the Duke certainly did, and at the end of the day, France was still an absolute monarchy. The government would now pay 3% yearly interest payments on the debt directly to the company, and Law would use this to pay for any potential new ventures. This is when you can say John had finally created his land bank. So to recap this financial hocus pocus, Louis XIV had done a bunch of expensive things. To finance these things, they issued debt which many people of France had bought to collect interest from the government, and this was all backed by gold. Law comes in and starts issuing paper notes, also backed by gold, but he's willing to accept this debt in exchange for paper notes. He also buys all of France's overseas trade, exchanging shares in the company for the debt as well. He uses hype to raise the share price of the company to expand it, which requires him to issue more paper notes. Then, the company buys the entire debt, needing to print even more notes. The debt moved from the crown to the company, and the payout moved from interest payments to company dividends. You might be thinking, wait, this doesn't actually get rid of the debt, but just transfers it from those who are comfortable holding the crown's bonds to those who want to see an insane return on their shares. And I'm kind of thinking the same thing. Whatever happened, the people were excited. Over the course of 1719, the Mississippi share price went up by 20 times. Not 20%, 20 times, from 500 livres to 10,000. Almost everybody who could get the shares were living large. Around Paris, at least, this new money was showing up everywhere. The middle class was now buying art pieces and crafted furniture. People started wearing silk, velvet, and golden cloth, so much so that a royal edict had to be passed to forbid liveried servants from wearing them. Watchmakers had to be imported from Switzerland to make up for all the new demand. Working class investors became little noblemen. People were wearing jewels, riding around in new carriages, and it was a little obvious people were eating better. Two terms were coined to describe the winners of this period that we still use today: nouveau riche and millionaire. As for John Law, who profited by far the most of this scheme, he put all of his proceeds into real estate. He bought the Palais Mazarin, 5 in the Place Vendôme, and 10 on Rue Saint-Honoré, one for the equivalent of $350 million US. All this new money was really helping the economy. As John Law had predicted, land was now employed again. Artisans and farm workers found that they had a steady stream of customers now. Customers with a lot of money that were willing to pay higher prices, so they charged higher prices. From the start of the scheme to the time of the peak, wages around Paris had quadrupled, and similarly, the average price level for staple goods had doubled. This was the first true instability the French people felt from this virtual money system. Inflation had spread across France, reaching over 20% a month in January. Why? The amount of livres in circulation had increased by about $1 billion throughout the year, then another $1.8 billion the following year until its peak. It's worth remembering that the Mississippi Company wasn't some financial abstraction, but an actual company dependent on the real profit it made. Louisiana had generated none. It was basically just a few hundred huts, and even with all the other trade revenue, the company's shares were trading at a price-to-earnings ratio of around 50. But the financial system had grown so dependent on these share prices that an office for the buying and selling of shares was set up by law in an effort to stabilize its price. The company itself would buy or sell its own shares to keep the value near or around 10,000 livres. This was directly inspired from the Dutch East India Company, whose shares Law had written had acted like money since they could be used to settle debt. When John publicly converted to Catholicism, he was allowed to become the Controller General of France, basically the Prime Minister, not bad for an ex-convict immigrant. He now officially merged the bank and the company into one entity, and John became increasingly despotic by this time. His new goal was to eliminate the link to gold entirely. Some could see the writing on the walls that this was all bound to collapse. In one story, the Prince of Conti had allegedly become so furious after Law rejected his application for Mississippi stock that he withdrew all the gold he could from his account. It took 3 wagons to carry it off, and although the Duke mandated he pay back 2 of those wagons, it didn't take long for others to catch on. Some began smuggling gold out of the country. They would buy plates or jewelry, hiding them in manure carts to get them to Holland or England. The problem was there were 2 times as many notes for every livre of gold or silver. If everyone were to convert their notes to gold, the system was sure to collapse. By February, Law gave up on stabilizing the stock, and a royal edict was passed to accept taxes only in banknotes. The government had also banned people from holding over 500 livres in coins. In something straight out of the Soviet Union, a pamphlet was distributed around Paris railing against money orders and encouraging people to spy on and turn in those they knew had kept a stash. If you turned them in, you got 1/2 of the profit. This was crazy. One nobleman wrote that it was inconceivable a sudden revolution did not break out. This measure did not guarantee stability or confidence as Law had hoped. People were distrustful of each other, their savings were wiped out at the stroke of a pen, and the excitement for the shares turned into state-mandated use of them as money. Another royal edict was passed to lock the value of the shares at 9,000 livres. To keep this peg required the printing of over 1 billion more livres into circulation. This terrible unrest continued for 2 months until the council met and determined it couldn't go on any longer. The value of paper livres had to fall or the value of gold livres had to rise. They chose the former. On May 1st, 1720, it was announced the company would suddenly reduce the value of its shares from 9,000 to 5,000 livres. The chaos that followed nearly broke the city. Some people had thrown their entire life savings into this company, and 44% of its value vanished in one day. There were great stampedes through the city. The royals had to hire Swiss guards to protect themselves. One day, when a crowd thought it saw John Law leaving his palace, the mob ripped his carriage to pieces. There were fights between the crowds and the guards, resulting in some deaths to both sides. One economist who had speculated against the French livre was expelled from the country for doing so. And finally, when the government allowed people to hold coins again, a rush on the royal bank resulted in 14 people being crushed to death. So much coin was taken out, the kingdom had to start minting them with copper. By this point in his life, Law hadn't just lost the confidence of the people, but his favor with the nobles. The Council of Finance wouldn't listen to him, and first, after stepping down as Controller General, he was appointed as a country seat governor, but after that didn't work out, the Duke permitted John Law a passport to leave the country. Even faster than he came in and completely reshaped the French economy, he left, leaving behind his wife and kids. The company was stripped of its minting and tax collecting privileges and continued on as a shell of its former self, with share prices eventually coming back down to around 500 livres. 11 years after its collapse, the Mississippi Company was returned to the crown. People distrusted paper money and financial innovations for generations, and for the rest of the ancient regime, only gold and silver were used as money, while religious institutions dominated finance. The bank was officially liquidated in 1723 after extensive talks over how to deal with its liabilities and how to restructure the debt. The now 13-year-old King Louis XV had been saddled with over 1 billion livres of it. But much of the debt simply vanished, as the notes it was denominated in no longer had any monetary value. Louisiana itself was lost under Louis XV's reign, and France went back to being fiscally constrained, running a government which constantly had troubles with raising revenue, a theme that would continue until the eventual French Revolution. John Law left in late 1720, first to Brussels, then England, and then to Venice. He left behind almost all of his wealth as property around Paris. He'd always thought of returning to France, but the death of the Duke of Orleans in 1723 severed the link to his closest ally and friend. He spent his last years gambling on reflecting on where he had gone wrong. Nothing he did was wrong, he thought. He still believed that sound money using paper would be the best way to run an economy, but the speculation of the public ruined it. In one case, he blamed the end of his scheme on a plague that had struck southeastern France that year, causing people to flee to the safety of gold. He had even offered his services to the Duke of Lorraine and the Papal States, both of course rejecting him after this saga. John Law died a relatively poor man. Duke of Lorraine and the Papal States, both of course rejecting him after this saga. John Law died a relatively poor man in Venice in 1729, after once becoming the most powerful man in the world. Although his scheme ended in spectacular failure and he died disgruntled and dismissed, John's ideas would come to define how a modern economy is run. Nearly everywhere on Earth uses paper money today. Considering how many opposing kingdoms he had proposed his ideas and helped to, regardless of his Scottish background, I think he would be absolutely delighted to see how his land bank proposal ended up today.
What the?
Seychelles is a small country tucked away in a corner of the world which hasn't been relevant in almost 200 years. It's a collection of over 100 islands just north of Madagascar, but 99% of its 100,000 odd people live on just 3. The vast majority on only Mahe, an island you could drive from tip to tip in less than an hour. Life here seems easy. Per person, it's the richest African nation, has the highest literacy rate in Africa, one of the lowest death rates, and is the least corrupt country on the continent. And on top of all that, you get to live here. It seems like an island paradise, which makes it kind of crazy to say that this was the result of a quite brutal dictatorship. Modern Seychellois politics and its way of life have been defined by the visions of one man, at a time being one part socialist repressive state and one part tax haven, to be used by foreign banks as a playground for millionaires. The man who Seychelles embodies was France Albert Rene. Since his violent takeover of the country in 1977, he's directly ruled for over half of independent history while his party stayed in power until 2020. Not typical of a dictator, he embraced the easy life, often being seen in a button-down shirt and expensive loafers, and never being afraid to take dodgy cash when needed. As a spoiler, Seychelles became rich through export abundance. Per person, they export the most things out of any African country, around $22,000 a Seychellois. Most importantly, through tourism. A lot of tourism, but also things like fishing and yacht registration of all things. It's this bounty of cash which has really allowed Seychelles to invest in the safety net which has made it famously such a nice place to live. But let's back up a little. The islands were administered by the British for around 150 years, seized from the French because they let too many pirates use it as a safe haven. It was then used, of course, as a slave-based plantation society, but since slavery was legally banned in the British Empire, it was indentured labor from freed African slaves, or Malagasy, Chinese, and Indian coolies. If you couldn't already tell by the pictures, or you're truly colorblind, congrats by the way, Seychelles is a very racially mixed country, and one which didn't see nearly the racial divisions as most other British colonies. The dominant ethnic group, Creole, is a mix of many of these different groups. Put another way, all of these men are Creole. But, politically, the main event... All of these men are Creole. But, politically, the main event of importance before independence was its cotton economy completely crashing, half of all freed people leaving to Mauritius and rebuilding itself as a coconut, vanilla, and cinnamon export hub. That's to say, a poor, crop-based society for the rest of its British history. In fact, Rene himself was born into a family which administered a coconut plantation. His father wasn't part of the elite sect of society which owned the land, the leftover families from French colonization, the Grand Blancs, but part of a poorer white family. He grew to be resentful of these landowners, and this upbringing would certainly make a mark for how he would run his country. Then, like many other Seychellois, he went abroad to the UK for school, but never liked it, coming back to practice law before again returning to London to work in banking. While there, because he was fluent in French, he was sent off to Jersey to work in offshore banking. Jersey, along with Guernsey, have had a murky status, famously being stashes for Britain's mega-rich to hide funds away from London authorities. This is another model he would replicate in Seychelles. When he finally came back from that, he became involved in politics, especially of African nationalism and decolonization, which, owing to Seychelles' small size and relative peace, it was quite late to. There, he faced his first challenge, James Mankom. Mankom, unlike Rene, loved the UK. His vision was staying a British colony for now and stacking bans through uninterrupted tourism and offshore banking. That part Rene agreed with. He also, to the point of his undoing, loved women. While president of Seychelles, somehow finding the time to judge the Miss World beauty pageant. Clergy members would broadly support Rene because of it, and the Western press never really treated him like a serious leader either. Mankim just always seemed to be on island time. In the last part of the colonial period, he led the Seychelles Democratic Party, while Rene formed the Seychelles People's United Party. This one pro-UK, pro-tourism, and conservative, the other pro-independence, anti-tourism, and socialist. There were 3 parliamentary elections during this period. Each and every one, Mankim won handsomely, despite having similar vote shares. It was a period which saw the development of an American satellite base, which grew to be the island's largest employer, as well as the opening of a brand new airport. Tourism boomed almost immediately when the island opened up to the outside world, and voters rewarded Mankim for it. So Rene, determined to lead his country to independence, became more militant, angry, and frankly fearful of Mankim. He took aid from the Organization of African Unity by portraying himself as the leader of a liberation organization, and would now support total war against reactionary elements, which ended up meaning a string of bombing attacks against the SDP. London didn't take this seriously, wanting to get rid of Seychelles after their east of Suez retreat.
Is this east of Suez?
Yes, Seychelles is east of Suez Canal region.
Mankim, as a result, did start to take more foreign money though, some even from the CIA. In what they're calling the worst CIA-funded government ever, they gave him a few $100s a month and a 10-member intelligence force team. Anyways, after the last election, Rene decided to join a coalition government with Mankim, despite the fact that they absolutely couldn't stand each other. During this time, they jointly negotiated independence. Yay! Lower the Union Jack, raise the Seychellois flag. Mankim would be president and Rene prime minister. But also during this time, it was increasingly clear to every possible observer that Rene wanted to be in charge. He was gonna coup the government. Pretty obvious was his stockpile of weapons on a small island off of Mahe. But more, Mankim was actually warned by the Kenyan government, a Saudi prince, a guy who was kicked out of Rene's coup, the UK police, and the CIA that one was coming. But for some reason, he ignored them. Really, the blame's on him. And while he was off in the UK for Queen Elizabeth's Silver Jubilee on the night of June 4th, 1977, it happened. They seized the critical areas of Mahe, the next morning announcing that Rene was delighted the people chose him to be their leader. 3 people were killed during the coup, including 1 unarmed SDP leader. Mankim, of course, initially bragged that he was with a supermodel the night it happened, but more seriously blamed the Soviets. But the Soviets had no idea what was going on. They blamed the Chinese, and the Chinese blamed the Soviets back. The real culprit was Tanzania, whose Pan-African socialist leader Julius Nyerere aided in training Rene's gangsters and providing weapons. It was one of the craziest outcomes of the world's newest state. Having only 60,000 people at the time, it would be like if Bermuda were to break out into a dictatorship today. Rene was obviously not tied to the socialist label. He was more Africanist, if that's a thing, but he ran an officially socialist government. It was more for development and to keep a distance from Western governments, which he absolutely hated, than any sort of advancement of workers. His new constitution would only allow a single party to run, with presidential ballots now just being yes or no questions to see him in charge or not. And not necessarily explicit violence, but disappearing people would be a common use of force to keep himself in charge. A senior SDP leader and outspoken critic of the regime, Hassan Ali, just vanished one day, only years later revealed to be killed in René's office. His wife had allegedly called René personally to ask him to investigate what happened to him. Of course, he didn't know anything, he told her. This was one of the most unique aspects of René's regime. Since it was such a small island, everyone knew everyone. René and his defense minister Ogilvy Berlouis would personally involve themselves in the investigations, instead of using independent police forces. It was unlike other brutal regimes where a chain of command could depersonalize the leader from those being killed. It was very personal here. In other cases, they were killed outside the country, most famously with the murder of Gérard Haraud, shot dead on his doorstep in the United Kingdom. Other ways to control opposition were mass arrests. One time, 21 SDP members were arrested together, some low-key torture, and by encouraging self-deportation through the seizure of land and assets. Trying to dismantle the Grand Blanc hold on land, he personally seized a La Digue villa in the process. Another way to control was with the Seychelles Marketing Board, a massive state monopoly which controlled most consumer goods as well as imports. The National Workers' Union would be the one and only labor union in the country, banning all others. But development and construction weren't nationalized. They were often given to allies of the regime, like to the wealthy Savy family, which René was connected to via his ex-wife's ex-husband. Unsurprisingly as well, Mr. Contrarian wasn't a big fan of tourism. Agriculture was sucked dry of labor once the airport opened, and people found it much easier to make money in hospitality. René wanted to boost it up again and maybe add industrial fishing to the mix too, to diversify away from tourism and become self-sufficient. This tuna canning plant was his pride and joy. He was so proud of it. But by the end of the regime, Seychelles actually ended up importing more food than before. And he just ended up accepting tourist dollars as the main source to build a safety net off of. Free education, free healthcare, free transport, low-cost housing, decent infrastructure, and very much growing wages. Honestly, not a bad trade for letting foreigners get drunk on your beaches. One of his most controversial legacies, though, remains the National Youth Service, an integral part in his eyes of building socialism. It was a camp, like a summer camp, where every Seychellois youngster would be sent out of high school to learn the practical skills René wanted to boost, like animal husbandry and fishing, as well as to be indoctrinated into the regime. The idea was inspired, by the way, after a state trip to North Korea, which remained a close ally to René, sending them troops and weapons along with East Germany and Cuba. So as a result of René's economic legacy, even today, around 70% of Seychellois work for the government, where most production is found. But despite being genuinely popular in the islands because of the increasing quality of life, not everyone was enamored with René. 10,000 people left the island during his dictatorship, 15% of the population. His media censorship alienated the upper and middle classes. The national youth didn't like him, although they would end up voting for him later in their lives. The Americans didn't like him, the Soviets didn't like him, and the South Africans particularly hated him. Seychelles was of deep interest to the apartheid South African government, being the offshore financial center they used to avoid Western sanctions. They saw it as so important to the point of sending a mercenary to go and kill him when he threatened to cut ties with the country. 4 years after René's coup, a counter-coup led by Mad Mike Hoare tried to bring Mankum back to power. They came disguised as a South African drinking club, Ye Ancient Order of Froth Blowers, but their weapons ended up being found in customs. After a shootout, the men hijacked an Air India flight and ran away back to South Africa, where nearly all of them were released without punishment. Botched coup attempts also occurred in 1982 and 1987, both from internal security forces, which both saw purges of his defense force after. When asked what he believed in, René answered that he was red on the outside but green on the inside. Perhaps nothing encapsulates this better than his mafia-aligned government. One of the key allies through his regime was Mario Ricci, a guy expelled from Italy, Switzerland, and Somalia who ended up in Seychelles. Would you really be surprised if I told you he had some mob ties? Befriending René, they created the Joint Seychelles Trust Company, a state-owned enterprise which would organize foreign companies and investments, helping them deal with tax codes, bureaucracy, all that. It was essentially the state-owned vehicle for anybody to evade their law, including for money laundering, drug trade proceeds, or just trying to avoid taxes. Which is why many people have given Seychelles the label, the world's only socialist tax haven. Victoria, a town of 20,000 people, held 8 major banks in it during René's day. And throughout this time, he worked with the infamous Gambino family, gave mafia members refuge, as well as used mafia muscles to, make his enemies sleep with the fishies. In 1995, René also passed the controversial Economic Development Act to let anybody who invested at least $10 million in the country be granted immunity to pretty much any foreign crime. This had to be revoked 5 years later though, due to the absolute international outrage it caused. By the 90s, after 3 coups and the collapse of both the Soviets and apartheid South Africa, René had the insight to no longer play both sides off each other, but join the Western liberal side. By his own accord, René had reversed his coup and state-led development strategy. That's right, he was done being a dictator, just like that. Another new constitution was drafted to turn the country into a multi-party democracy. Mankum made a party. This new guy, Wavel Ram Kalawan, who actually lived under René, ran against his party 6 times before his big break in 2020, and then René's own coalition fractured, his defense minister and tourism/youth minister both making parties of their own. But all that didn't matter much. Every election René took part in, he won. One of the major reasons he did this was to be able to take loans from the big 3, the IMF, World Bank, and African Development Bank, which in the 90s had some pretty strict restrictions on lending you money without conditionality. Some of the general conditions were to become a democracy, slash the government budget, raise taxes, and privatize state-owned assets. Various waves of privatization hit Seychelles as the debt grew more and more unsustainable. Frankly, the longer he stayed in power, the more his government resembled Mankum's original vision of Seychelles, a liberal, tourist-filled tax haven. It was also during this time they really hammered out the framework to let foreigners hide money here with a couple of acts, and let foreigners register yachts the cheapest in the world. 2 shady aspects of the current budget which are a legacy of René's personal views of money. In his quest against tourism, René did end up nationalizing 2 hotels, which were eventually sold not back to the original owners, but to a Malaysian firm instead. Foreign capitalists were still preferable to domestic enemies. 60% of his precious tuna cannery was sold to Heinz, ironically actually boosting profits to the government as productivity shot up. In fact, now Seychelles makes a ton of its money through the sale of its land to foreigners, which they can own 100% of. The outer islands are prime real estate for any unsatisfied billionaire to go crazy on. Not that crazy. Rene stepped down in 2004 because, get this my American audience, he thought he was too old at 68 to lead the country. He did lead for 27 years straight after all. Let him at least live a little on the islands. The next 12 years were led by a Rene loyalist, James Michel, then succeeded for 4 years by Danny Foray, also a member of their party. On a timeline, here's Rene's rule, and here's his party's rule. It's no wonder then, especially for such a small country, that Rene has come to completely dominate it. He only died in 2019, the same year much of the worst things came out about his regime via the Truth and Reconciliation Council. His two successors continue to do much of the same things as Democratic Rene, not Marxist Rene. Offshore finance, tourism, fishing, keeping the moneymakers to keep the safety net. Because they're so tied to the ocean economy, they did lead some efforts to fight the Somali pirates back when that was a whole ordeal, and they've also guilted some more investment by threatening to dig up oil if someone doesn't invest green energy into the country. COVID and the financial crash were understandably big deals for a debt-ridden, tourist-based economy. They made a stock market, a small one, but it's real. Oh, and the Americans are back after shutting their embassy down for 23 years, pretty much only because of the increasing Chinese influence on the islands. But other than those, most of the political story of the country is tied up in this one man. Rene was kind of like the left-wing version of Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew. Not a very ideological guy, but certainly convicted that he, and only he, should be in charge. Both ended up presiding over great transformations of their countries, in a benevolent dictator type of way, into the richest in their respective regions. So my one last question to you is, why don't more people know about Rene when we all gawk over Lee? Duh, there's one obvious answer. There are no edits of him.
Hello and welcome, history buffs. My name is Nick Hodges, and over the years, I've reviewed a few films about infamous criminals in history, but I figured for the next 2 episodes, why not cover the richest and most notorious one of all, Pablo Escobar. In the smash hit Netflix series Narcos, its first 2 seasons tells the story of his rise and fall, from his roots as a small-time smuggler in Medellin, Colombia, to quickly becoming the richest drug lord who ever lived. At the height of his power, he was estimated to be worth $30 billion.
3 pisos en este edificio. Este. Ay. Piso. En edificio. Verdad. Ay. 3 pisos en edificio. Un. Piso. En. Este. Edificio. Hay. 3. Pisos. En. Está. Edificio.
Yo, come here. This is part 4.
dollars, and he used his illicit fortune to wage war on Colombia itself. In less than 10 years, he would be responsible for the deaths of thousands, from journalists, cops, buffs. My name is Nick Hodges, and here's my long-awaited review for this epic miniseries, based on the true story of the worst nuclear disaster in history. In the early morning hours of April 26th,
Hello, I'm Chang. I'm 21 years old, and I study at live in a city in Vietnam. Today is my day off.
Let's go outside and trade.
Pacific Rim aged like fine freaking wine. Matter